Hey folks, my name's Kevin, and it's time for a little bit more knife nerdery. And today we are continuing and I guess finishing an unboxing from knives from my friend Stefan. So this is part of a much bigger box of knives that he sent me. All of those were part of a Laconico lineup, a tasting flight, if you will, of Laconico knives, Ray Laconico knives, across different makers and across, well, different manufacturers and different price points. So if you want to see the actual literal taking this out of a box, part of an unboxing, you'll have to go check out that other video. But I haven't actually looked at this yet, so let's dig in. And no, this is not a Civivi. It is a... yeah. So this is a knife by MKM. We'll talk about what that means in a moment. Get that to focus. This is the Goccia. Okay, yeah. Gotta open this up. Gotta take a look at this blade. Oh, yeah. Wow, look at this knife. This is a knife from Jens Anso. This is effectively the production version of his knife called the Neo. We'll talk about that more in a moment, but this version is called the Goccia because that is the Italian word for drop. And this is so obviously immediately apparent what that's referring to when you look at these handle scales, because this looks so much like a droplet of water radiating out as you falls into a still body like a lake or something like that. It just looks so freaking cool. And it is obviously the most immediately eye-catching part of this knife. This is done in a really neat way. These handles are available in a bunch of different materials, carbon fiber, titanium, everything. But this version is done in G10, and they achieve this effect by contouring it in a unique, uncommon way. Normally, if you contour G10, here, let's look at another example. This is one of the other ones that Stefan sent me. This is Ray Laconico knife, the Sirius from Artisan Cutlery. This is the same material, of course, G10, and G10, of course, is layers of carbon fiber sheet, not carbon fiber, of fiberglass sheet held together with resin and everything. And if you contour a material like that, you will reveal the layers below. But if you do it in a smooth slope like that, you'll get these nice, soft, fuzzy transitions. What they're doing over here is more like a topographical map where they have flats that come and then sharp cut off flats that come. And it's done in a way where it's not actually like rough. You definitely feel the texture, but it's mostly just visual, where you have like this layer is all at the same height, and that layer is a step down. It just looks so freaking neat, and that is obviously a big part of the draw of this knife. But part of it is also just, look at this dang thing. So like I said, this is a knife designed by Jens Anso. Jens Anso is a Danish knife maker that has a long and illustrious career of designing knives that he either makes himself as customs, or that he has partnered with other manufacturers to make like this. He's also one half, or I mean, I guess 1/3, the third person would be their business partner, but he's one half of the design crew of Giant Mouse knives, the other half being Jesper Voxnays. And so I also brought out two of my Giant Mouse knives. This is the Ace Biblio, and this is the Ace Riv, to just kind of give you a sense of what's going on here. Like, this is obviously, there's obviously different styling here. Like, these are clearly differently shaped knives, but there's actually a lot of similar design cues if you look at how these are shaped. Like, this here has this swoop up to an arch at the back, a swoop down, a swoop up back again at the tip, and then a curve down, and then a blade that is all belly and coming up high. And if you look, we've got the exact same thing going on here. A swoop up to an arch at the back, a swoop down, a swoop back up at the end, a swoop down, and then a blade that is all belly. And so if you're ever curious about what parts of Giant Mouse's designs are coming from Jesper versus which sides are coming from Jens, this is kind of an insight into that. Like, if you look at this knife and if you look at like the Sonoma, those are definitely leaning more in the Anso-y direction. And people often talk about the Riv as if it's a baby version of the Biblio. And sure, of course it is. But if you look at the way that this blade shape is actually done, up here, the tip is coming significantly further down, and there's not that same kind of swoop up here. This is actually flat, whereas this goes up slightly. And so this is more like if you took the Biblio and pulled it in an even more Voxnasian direction. And this is more kind of just pure Anso-ian. And honestly, if I'm being honest, I think that the Biblio is effectively a production version of a different Anso knife. It's clearly not literally the production version the way this is. The silhouette on this one is exactly the Neo, but this is basically the Ziggy. I don't know. Tell me if you think I'm wrong. But looking back to this, we said this is the Neo. It's kind of a scaled down version of the Neo. The Neo has been made in several different blade sizes, and so it's kind of hard to say that it's scaled down. What does it mean to be scaled down since it's been offered in different sizes? But most of the Neos that I've ever seen listed anywhere, they came in like a 3 3/8 or 3.5 inch blade, and this is just under 3 1/4. And so overall, this is going to be slightly smaller, but it still maintains the exact same profile, including this little lanyard hole back here that I'm going to rant about later. But what the Neo doesn't have, at least not in any version I've ever seen, there's of course lots of variants with different kind of handles, but none of them have this really cool drop pattern here, and hence this one deserving its own name. Okay, so this thing is made by MKM right there, Magnago, Italy. But yeah, I've seen this in pictures before. It says right here, made by MIKITA. That's M-I-K, get that to focus, M-I-K-I-T-A. So what's the deal? What's going on here? Who actually made this knife? And I think this is when we're going to take a short, maybe not so short, detour into Italian knife making. And what does this all mean? So Magnago, Italy is kind of like Solingen, Germany, where it's a city that has a very, very, very long history in knife making and steelwork and all that kind of fun. And there's a bunch of different companies that all make knives there as a result. And so Magnago Knife Makers, that name, Magnago Knife Makers, that's a consortium of knife and knife related, so like they include stuff like scissor makers and stuff like that. It's a consortium of knife making companies that are all headquartered in Magnago. Now, MKM, yeah, it does stand for Magnago Knife Makers, but MKM, as like a 3-letter name, is a brand that's made up of several of the members of that consortium. A consortium, of course, is just like an association. Maybe they have like a conference together. They all are on terms with each other. They all talk. But a brand is a specific like product line. It's a business entity that is trying to sell knives under a specific label. And these are made by 4 or 5 of the folks that are part of that consortium. Things like Lion Steel, Fox Knives, Mercury, Viper, maybe someone else that I'm forgetting. I forget. But what is MIKITA then? MIKITA is what they call like a logistical and supply chain business network. So it's more than a association of companies. It's an actual like business arrangement that allows them to act together to produce a single brand. So MIKITA is what is the thing that says all of those brands I just mentioned a moment ago, Lion Steel, Viper, Fox, what makes them, for example, share common production factories, makes them share R&D departments, makes them share supply chains, sourcing for materials and stuff like that. And so while each of those brands maintains their own specialties and kind of identity, they all share the same production capabilities in order to help band them together and kind of leverage that scale kind of factor when making knives. And so when something is made by MKM, it's really hard to know who actually made it, which of those sub brands actually made it. But at the same time, what does it even mean if they're all sharing the same general production facility and sourcing and whatnot? What does it mean for one of them to have made it as opposed to another? I'm not familiar enough with these brands to immediately say, oh, this one, that one looks like it's Fox. But honestly, if I had to guess, I would probably say Fox, just because it does kind of look like Fox to me more than it looks like Lion Steel. And it has sort of Foxian elements, if you will, more than Lion Steel. And it just, I don't know. Maybe it really looks like Viper. I just don't really know them that well. I also just know that like Jens and Jesper have worked directly with Fox in the past, both of them. And so that's kind of why I'm leaning there. It doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, these are made by members of that MIKITA, whatever they call it, business network that are working as out of that association called Minyago Knife Makers. Okay, that was a long rant. Man, I don't know. Long backstory. Coming back to this real quick, this is made by the same people. So if you go look at Jimouse's knives, their knives are sourced or are using different OEMs across different knives in their lineup. Their most recent slip joint is made by Best Tech, but everything else that was done in China, like this, was done through Riyadh. Or Riyadh, there we go, pronunciation. But most of their knives were done in Italy through, and they just say Minyago. They just say, crafted to highest standards in Minyago, Italy. They don't even say MKM, but again, it doesn't really matter. But I definitely think these are coming from the exact same factory for a couple of different reasons. The grind looks very similar. It comes to a very similar end. And little things like this lock bar jimping. Yeah, I've seen this in pictures. I've never handled this knife before, but I've looked at pictures and I fully expect to hate this lock bar jimping. Yeah. I hate that. Okay, let's stop talking about the backstory of this knife and start talking about the knife itself. I said earlier that this is like roughly 3¼ inch blade, but this is kind of a heavy knife. I think this is listed at places at like 3.9 ounces, and that's not heavy in general. Under 4 ounces is not a heavy knife, but it's a little bit heavy when you have just a 3¼ inch blade. And where are we getting that weight? Yep. Look at this beefy blade stock. Oh my God. Why? Why are they doing that? Why are they doing that? This is a full 0.16 and wow, it's not wanting to focus. And just to what? To what possible end is this 0.16? This is a small, relatively lightweight, relatively slim EDC knife. Why does it need to be such a chunky steel? It just doesn't. And so as a result, yeah. So this, yeah, honestly, this comes to a thinner edge than I was expecting. But if from looks of it and just feeling it with my fingers, I'm going to say that this is coming to about 20 thousandths behind the edge. That's my guess. Maybe 22. And that is admirable, really quite admirable, given where they're coming from. But why did they do this? Why did they come from this thick blade stock? Like this over here is doing that same thing. This is coming to 19 to 20 thousandths behind the edge, but it's coming from much thinner blade stock. I forget what this is, but I want to say 0.13. 0.125, something like that. And so why are they doing that? Sure, this will still slice. Of course it will, but it's going to wedge so much more on just about anything that's stiff. Like if you're trying to cut even just regular cardboard, you're going to feel this wedge. Can you imagine trying to cut an apple with this? Whew. But I mean, it does give you a really robust tip. I don't know, maybe this is still going to be what someone wants in a slicing knife. It's not a terribly short blade. This isn't tremendously long either. You can see that the entire thing is a shorter grind. Maybe I'll hold it up that way instead. It's a shorter grind than you have over here on the Biblio, but with the thinner blade stock and the taller grind, this is actually a very slicey knife, even though it only comes to 19, 20 thousandths. That's actually pretty good. This, on the other hand, I'm guessing is about the same, but it's gonna wedge just so much more. But right behind that, okay, the plunge grind is done fantastically well. Let's get this to focus. Yeah, look at that. So this is the kind of plunge grind that isn't even so much like a radiused curve. It's almost just completely flat, but it's done at an angle. So the plunge grind, of course, is the grind that takes this from the full thickness up here to the thinnest behind the edge. And they've done they've done a really nice job. This is very aggressive. It drops off very quick. And so what we have right here, wow, getting this to Focus. What we have right here is all of this space right here that you can use for sharpening. And so while this isn't a very deep sharpening choil, you do have this entire space right there. So yeah, it's done really, really well. I would say it would be nice to have even more depth, but honestly, I'm not going to fault him for that. That's nice. Oh, I hate it. Okay, I hate this lock bar jimping because this is basically a saw. This just feels like a saw. That's something that I knew I'd hate because I hate it over here. I hate jimping on lock bars, period. It's just a bad idea. Don't do it. Jimping works by adding traction when you move across the jimping, not along or against it like this. So this is the motion, the direction of where it gives traction. And you're not actually pushing up, you're pushing to the side. So why give you these jabby little bits that aren't actually giving you traction in the direction you want? And this is just the kind of thing that's going to wear on my finger. It's luckily shallow enough that it doesn't really hurt to push on it. That's fine, I guess. I mean, it actually does kind of hurt. It is the reason why it matters. So my favorite kind of jimping is the kind that is sharp like this and is shallow like this, but where the actual like crests of the jimping, or I don't know what you call them, jimps, I don't know what you call it, are wider out, because these come to these tiny little jabby tips. And okay, I don't know. That's definitely bugging me. Also, this is a reasonably strong lock bar. Yeah, okay, I'm gonna go back, take my reasonably and just say this is a full-on strong lock bar. Oof. Okay, so I'm guessing that this is not super, yeah. Okay, so that's not that bad. It's like, it's a pretty smooth transaction there. It's just a lot of lock bar strength, and so this is definitely not a free falling knife. I don't expect that this to be hard to close if I'm not under the camera. Yeah, it's easy to swing it closed if I have the vertical space to do that, but it definitely is a lot of lock bar pressure. Where is this whoa. Oh, okay. That is really, 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 really late detent engagement. So what I'm talking about there's the detent ball, and you have to close the knife a certain amount to be up onto that detent ball. And that's when the point where you can then take your thumb out of the way and you can swing the knife home, and it won't get stopped by that. And it matters the most on flipper tab knives, because the flipper tab is going to try and crush your finger. And yeah, I mean, the shape of this flipper is better than some, in the sense that it's not super duper crushing my thumb, but I'm not up on the detent ball yet. There's actually up in the detent ball, and that's kind of crushing my thumb. Can I even get it to fall to my thumb and be on the detent? No, I'm not quite. Wow, that's late. Look, yeah, just to give you a sense again, this is where the detent is, and that is open all the way. That's got to be 30 degrees? No, 25? Man, I don't know. I'm going to have to measure that. Let's wipe this off. Using my Renegade Provisions Co. wool hank. It's got great microfiber on the back. That's just great for kind of wiping off these smudges. Okay, yeah, okay, but look at that. I did notice this just a moment ago. Yeah, okay, right. So right there, do I have a pointy thing? Right there is a detent ball ramp. It's not a particularly good detent ball ramp, and what I mean by that is you still have to bump up on. It's not sufficiently deep in this direction to make it so that you don't bump up on it in some way, and it's also very short. Or is it? I honestly, maybe it's not. I'm not 100% sure where I'm hitting the top of the detent ball ramp. I'm suspecting that it's so short, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're curving it. All I know is that there is the bump to get on, but it's cool that there's a detent ball ramp at all. I've done this a number of times in this video, and I hate this flipper tab. I hate it. 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 This strong lock bar pressure means that there is a very strong detent on this. This requires a lot of force to come out. Now, I do know that one of the things that Stefan said to me about this knife is that it had a burr when he first got it. He said that he had to go in and disassemble the knife and try and remove a burr that was making this catch in a way that was kind of like punk, punk. And I think it's still doing that a little bit. Here, you hear that? It makes a very particular kind of punk noise, but the result is that this is still a very strong detent. Let's see our detent engagement. Yeah, you can see the ball is sitting all the way in. So when you have a ball sitting all the way in and the lock bar pressure is that strong, this is a firm detent, and this is just jabby as heck. That's the real reason why I hate this. This being low down and forward like this is cool. I love those kind of flipper tabs, and it wouldn't hurt if it weren't such a firm amount of pressure you have to pull on this, because if this is good traction, this is like effective jimping. It's not really at the very tip. That kind of slides, and that's kind of defeating the point, because it's not hard to fall off that. Yeah, I don't love that. But it's just this sharp corner and a sharp texture that's just like that jimping, where it just feels kind of like a saw that you're having to push really hard against. Ooh, that's fun. That's honestly, this is one way that I like to open knives. It's kind of weird doing this under, because I'm worried I'm going to hit my my camera. But this is one I actually like opening knives that are flipper tab knives. I like holding them as if it was a front flipper, but then just pressing down on the back like that. And that is probably the most comfortable way to open this, because I can just push directly down with the big meat of my thumb. Because that is really starting to hurt me. I'm gonna ask Stefan if he is comfortable with me trying to lower this lock bar pressure, because I think that would make this knife considerably more enjoyable. While we have this open, it looks like we do not have any kind of skeletonization inside, but we do have full liners. I'm gonna go ahead and assume that they are steel liners, but maybe they're tie. Here, maybe I can check that. Something magnetic. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so those have got to be steel liners. That looks like tie though. Yep, is. Okay, let's check out this clip real quick. That's cool looking. Sure, why not? We've got a recessed clip with countersunk screws. That's awesome. Comes all the way up to the end. That's great. And this is such a knife that comes down so slim at the end that's gonna show basically nothing coming in your pocket. Yeah, that's great. How's retention? None. Okay, this is a very springy clip. That is weak. So I don't imagine this will stay in your pocket super duper well, but it looks like it's got good ramp. How's it feel in hand? You know, honestly, I'm feeling it in hand in general for the first time right now. The clip feels fine. I feel it. It doesn't bug me. It feels pretty nice. They did a pretty good job of flattening this off in the end, so none of this feels jabby. How do the actual ergos in this hand feel? Actually, that feels great. Yeah. Yeah, that's quite nice. Putting my thumb on that big pinch grip. Yeah, so one of the benefits of this incredibly long, thick blade stock is that it does feel really nice to push your finger on that. One of the benefits of this really shallow belly, it's not a big round belly, is that there's nothing really getting in the way of you getting to this tip. If there's a really deep belly, then you have to really kind of roll your knife up around it to even get at the tip. With this, you know, I can get to the tip by just coming to there. It's not going to be the same as piercing, but like there's nothing really blocking me from accessing the tip right there. And so you could actually do utility cuts with this really, really well. And I'm sure it is thin enough up there that you could, yeah, I'm sure this will work really, really well for utility cuts. Maybe that's one of the reasons he really likes it. It feels nice in my hand. What else do I want to think about? That flipper tab that I was ranting about earlier in terms of the way it feels like that does hide down here in this really nice way. It's not that it's outright hidden, but one of the benefits of this, aside from the fact that it's not acting as any kind of what Shabazz calls a pocket pecker in your pocket, it's nice and flat, is that it does come really low. I wonder how well I can choke up. Yeah, I'm gonna say you can. Sure, that kind of works. I have medium-sized glove hands, and so my fingers aren't huge. You can see that the edge right here is cut forward, and so it's not sticking straight down, and so it doesn't feel like it's going to cut me if I just press against this, but there's not a whole lot of room there. I wouldn't say this is like anything approximating a real choil, but it is enough, and this is actually, because this is as wide it is and as flat it is, and there is a very subtle chamfer on the edge, you can see it glowing right there. This feels nice. It feels good to wrap my finger around. It doesn't hurt. I don't think I would actually hold it like this very often, especially just because this is not that much further behind, and this feels great. Yeah, the ergos on this actually do feel pretty darn great. What else do I want to think about this? Right, so this is the kind of lanyard that I consider a cardinal sin of design for me and my standards. I don't like lanyards. I'm not a lanyard person. I totally understand that they have value. I totally understand that they have aesthetic value as well. It gives people the opportunity to play with beads and different styles of cord, and I get it. People are into it. I'm not. And so for me, if there's gonna be a lanyard hole on a knife, I want it to be the kind that's like invisible effectively. Like here, this one that I showed earlier is a great example. You just don't see it. It just isn't there until you look up from up here, and it's basically hidden. And I just generally prefer that. The reason why I consider this a cardinal sin is because I hate when you take the back of a knife and make it smaller and sharper just for the sake of a lanyard. So this is the kind of thing where, oh man, this one does it really, really bad. So this is the kind of thing where you are making the part of the knife that rests into the back of your palm even narrower and jabbier than it would have had to have been otherwise. Like this knife, I adore the riv, but its biggest problem for me by far, actually the biggest problem is this flipper tab. On this stonewash version only, the flipper tab is useless, but if you are using this in a pinch cut, which it is so good in a pinch cut, if you're doing that, this pushes back into the palm. That's just how the knives designs work. And this, but what's pushing into the back here are all of these little corners, and then this one concentrating all the force in one small spot corner. And like, sure, it's not awful, but it doesn't need to be like that. If they had just made this the full thickness back here, you'd have such a wider spot pushing into your palm, and it just feels so much better. And so this one, honestly, is a lot better than some, just because this is pretty darn wide because of how thick that blade stock is, and it's pretty soft. They did an okay job of making this not jabby, and you can also see that they added just enough contouring and corners right there to make these parts not jabby. And so I don't mind this particular one in practice, but I hate any time I see these on knives, especially if you find one that's like a really sharp corner, and especially if it comes to corners there. You can definitely see that it is wearing on the ano right there and there, because that is the spot that rubs. What else would I look at on this? It's got cool pivot collars. That's fun to see. It's got double keyed, which is unfortunate, and that implies that it is free spinning until you put a tool on the other side too, but at least it is tooled on both sides. One thing I do notice is that the angle of this grind is pretty interesting. So if you look at something like this, you'll see that those grind lines are going straight up and down, right? And so if we look at something like this, this is a sheet of paper I've used in the past to represent the plane of the grind. This is going to be like right cut like this. You can see that this line at the top right there is the full thickness of the blade, and that's where the top of the grind is occurring. And so it's not that it's like perfectly like this, it's usually more kind of tilted inward, but this is generally speaking how this grind is done. You can see those lines line up with those lines, and it's generally something like that. This is cut like this. So you might at first want to assume that this is cut like that, and I guess maybe it kind of is in terms of the plane in order to keep this thin. Like in order for this to be as thin as it is, because this barely drops below the top. Actually, no, wait a minute. You can see this is doing an interesting thing. Rather than a straight grind, they're curving the grind as we go. The actual angle of these lines is on this orientation, but the top of this plane is curving up as we go, and that's how they're keeping it as thin as they are at the end. So they basically have a grind where the belt is staying in this direction, or whatever it is that they're using to grind it is staying in this direction. but then the angle of the actual plane of that belt is like curling up and rolling. That's really pretty cool to see. Honestly, it's just a neat look too, and it keeps it in line with this part here. And so it makes the entire knife look like it's leaning forward almost, which gives it this kind of fast, pointy, jabby, sharp look. Yeah, I don't know. At the end of the day, I think that this knife is kind of a chore to use. It's just really hurting my flipper tab. The flipper tab is just really hurting my finger. And I'm gonna see if Stefan is okay with trying to adjust this lock bar strength. I think that from a closing perspective, it's not the greatest either, just because of how incredibly late this detent engagement is, but the blade is heavy enough that if you see what I'm doing there, I'm putting it up. I'm not up on the detent ball yet, but just using the weight of the blade, I'm able to push it up that detent ball ramp. And so they are compensating. Ow, see, that sucked. We're falling off, that sucked. Anyway, I think this is a little bit of a chore to use in terms of deployment and redeployment, undeployment, closing. I'll just go with closing. But once it's open, it feels nice in my hand. I'm sure it's probably a bit of a chore to use too from a cutting perspective, just because of this blade steel, which again, why doesn't need to be. But man, it does look nice and it does feel nice in hand, and it is pretty darn cool to get to see the Neo. Yeah. I forget if I mentioned this earlier. Did I mention this earlier, that this is effectively the Ziggy? I think I mentioned that earlier. I don't know. We'll find out. Anyway, yeah, I think that's probably everything I'm going to say on this. I'm not going to take it apart unless he says that I can. And even then, I probably won't film it. I don't think that there's really anything particularly weird. Oh, no, wait. Man, 30 something minutes in, I forgot there is something weird. Right. One of the reasons why he sent this to me is because they're doing this part odd right there. This is the lock cut face, the lock face that's cut out onto the blade. And he asked me, like, the whole reason he sent me this in the first place is because he asked me my opinion on why I thought it was ending abruptly and ending with a flat spot. Like most knives, let's pull out any of these. Most knives, well, that's not going to work well. Well, no, that's fine. Most knives, their lock face extends all the way across. Like that's just kind of ubiquitous. You'll see them just extend all the way across. And that's not just these knives, like all the way across. They're all gonna be like that. And so it's surprising when you find that. And so when he first showed me a picture of that, and I hadn't really looked at the rest of the knife, or when he mentioned that to me, I said that a possible reason for that was that they were using this to be the engagement for the stop pin. And here, let me grab something that shows that. Okay, one of the few places that I've seen that is on Shirogorov knives. This is the Neon R20. It's effectively the Neon Zero is just a special version of it. And you can see, where is the best way to show that? You can see right here that they also end that lock face prematurely and have a flat. It's effectively the same thing. But they're doing it here because that flat surface is what's hitting this stop pin in the closed position. And so if they didn't do that, if they left it going all the way across like a normal knife would do, you would have just a thin, sharp edge like you have on any other knife that'd be making that kind of focus. They're making that kind of contact. And so they leave it as a small flat specifically for that purpose. And obviously that's not what is happening over here because there's no stop pin. This is the kind of knife that has an internal stop pin that is traveling with the blade through a smile-shaped arc cut into the handles, which you can see right there. And so that's not the reason. Is there a reason? My honest reaction looking at this is that I think the reason is just because of how thick this blade stock is. Yeah, you could certainly make it so it went all the way across. The lock face angle is typically around 8 to 9 degrees. Different companies and different makers have different preferences and different opinions on what is the ideal angle and to not have lock slip and everything like that, but it's usually about 8 to 9 degrees. And so if you start an 8 or 9 degree angle right there, it just doesn't go all the way across the blade. I don't know, I could be wrong. You could obviously push that back and clear the entire thing. But if you look at where this needs to start, it needs to start basically, so they have this lock bar that ends right here. And there is a part of the handle that it sits behind. And so if they were to make that go all the way across, this lock bar itself would need to extend further in order to not, if they didn't extend the lock bar further and did push the lock face back to make it go all the way across, this current lock bar would have like 60 to 80% lockup. And so since they want a relatively early lockup at the beginning of a knife's lifespan, so that has time to go over, they pull that lock face up to meet it. And if you just start that angle low enough down that it's meeting this lock bar, which is its own length based on the handle. Anyway, if you just start that lower, I think a 9 degree angle, 8 degree angle just runs off the edge before it reaches the other side. I think it's that simple. I could be wrong. I don't know. If anyone has a better idea of why they would do this intentionally, sure, let me know. It's possible that they did this intentionally as a way of like, you can see it kind of swoops up. And so maybe they did this as a way of kind of guaranteeing that it doesn't move past like 50, 60% lockup. Honestly, that could be it right there. Like if you have a knife like this and the end of this ramp is all the way over there, then the blade will slowly over time work its way up this ramp by just wearing slightly more and more off of this lock bar. And this will reach the edge of this ramp, which is the most this will ever go, all the way over here at roughly 100% engagement. And this one will reach that same position at roughly 60. So I don't know. I don't know if there's any real design reason. It could just be a consequence. It could be something intentional. If you have a strong opinion of what you think is going on, let me know down in the comments. I think that's the only other thing he actually asked me about, and that's probably everything. And this is now a 37-minute long video that I wasn't quite expecting to be such a small details review. But maybe, I don't know, maybe I'll call this a small details review. It's been nearly 40 minutes of me rambling about all the little details of this knife. So sure, let's just call this a small details review. It won't be, honestly, this actually has a lot of the same elements as okay, I'm just going to call this a small details review. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Thank you, Stefan, for sending this my way and for sending me this and all the other knives you sent my way. And as I said in the other video, thank you, Stefan, just for how patient you've been with me on this too. Stefan sent these to me a very long time ago, but then there wasn't really any urgency to get to it because he was out of the country for a while. But then he got back into the country and I just got overloaded and forgot I had it. And he said there's no pressure and it just took me forever. So yeah, thank you for your patience. Thank you for sending in the first place. Thank you all for watching and I'll catch you guys next time. So Stefan said I could take this apart and adjust this. And so originally that's what I was going to show you is adjusting this. There's not a whole lot to it. Basically what you do is you pay attention to where it started. I like to take a picture, give myself some kind of reference point of how far it is out right now. And then you just gently bend this inward. You're going to have to bend it past the point that you normally would be able to bend it. And then you see where it comes to. And you want very minor adjustment. You're talking about like instead of here, you want like there to there, that kind of thing. We're talking very small adjustments. And if you go too far, you can always bend it back. Just be gentle but firm. Don't go quickly, and don't, if you feel like you might be breaking it, yeah, maybe you are. Just don't go crazy hard. But anyway, the actual adjustment is really straightforward. You can find lots of videos on that. I might do a full thing some other time. I might do one on a liner, a frame lock where you have to take out the lock bar insert or something like that. But the real reason I started filming right now is because, yeah, one of the consequences of steel liners is that they can rust. So just, if you have a knife with steel liners, recognize that if moisture gets trapped behind it, it will rust. So There are metals that won't. So the steel liner, lock bar liner in the Waypoint, for example, is made of LC200N, which is effectively unrustable. But most steels can rust. And so you can use something, I know like Shabazz uses frog lube in his videos. You can use something like EDCI. You can use mineral oil. But the point is you put some kind of coating of rust inhibitor on the back before you shove it in here. Because when moisture gets trapped in there, it just rusts. So what I'm going to use to get this off, you can see this is what happens if you've just been scrubbing it. So this is just, I used, a tissue and a Q-tip with just isopropyl alcohol. And so what that will do is get rid of like active rust parts, but it's not going to get rid of the core real rust. I'll show you live what that looks like. If I take this and start rubbing on this, you can see that I'll get like I'll be getting off the top levels. But to actually get the rust off itself, I'm going to use a product called Barkeeper's Friend. Barkeeper's Friend is significantly less aggressive than something like Winks or Rust Remover. Winks is a liquid, it's a strong acid, and it will eat away the rust very quickly, but it'll also eat away the general material. It can kind of acid etch, almost, you could say. So I use Barkeeper's Friend in my kitchen. It's a fantastic product for stainless steel pots and pans. If you ever get rusting or corrosion, it works on all sorts of stuff. It's the best cleaner for stainless pans that I've ever found. But it's basically a light acid and a low grit abrasive. And so because it's a low grit abrasive, it works almost like a magic eraser in that sense, but you have to be kind of careful because that low grit, that format of removing stains is not really what I'm trying to get at here. And so I will make a little paste of it. It comes as a powder, and I'll just let it soak on this for a moment, and I'll very gently, because I'm not trying to use the grit aspect, I'm just trying to use the acid part. So I'll show you, I don't know, maybe I'll be able to film a video of what that looks like, but that's out in my kitchen. But I'll show you the results when I get back. Okay, so we're back. Right, so you can see that the Barkeeper's Friend did not remove 100% of the staining. It's not gonna. It's a reasonably light acid. But what it does do is immediately neutralize the corrosion that's there. You can see that it turns it black in this way. That's because the way that these types of acid-based rust removers work is that they have a chemical reaction with the rust itself, the oxidation type material that's forming. And so, yeah, at this point, what's left is a little bit of rust damage. That's like kind of, material that's been eaten away slightly by the rust, because this one had a lot of rust, and a little bit of staining, but this is not active rust anymore. And so it can rust again. We're going to need to put rust preventative on it. But for the most part, it is just kind of cosmetically impacted. You can go further. You can get these black marks completely off. I don't have any product with me right now that will do that, and it's also just a much more aggressive thing, and that's not something that I'm going to want to do to someone else's knife unless they really ask me to. So I'll leave that up to Stefan to see if he wants to try and make this cosmetically different. But right now it is no longer rusting and it is mostly cleaned up. I will put some oil on this and when I reassemble it and send it back off to him. As far as the lock bar adjustment itself, I haven't done that yet, but I will do that and see if it makes it a more pleasant to use. So again, where we're starting off, maybe I should do something a little bit more. I don't know, maybe I'll get a ruler out. But anyway, the whole idea is you basically just pay attention to where it started and overbend it very, very mildly in the tiniest little bits at a time until you get it there instead of there instead of there. It's such a small difference. Anyway, yeah, I will maybe have an update after that. We'll see. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention is just making sure you try to get rust out of these inner spots. Now, this is G10. It's not something that can itself corrode, but this is still like rust up in there, and it can be hard to get like in that space. And so, yeah, I'm going to try and use a toothpick and a couple other things, see if I can get as much of this off as possible. Some of this is just staining, honestly. G10 is a material that does take stain effectively, and so some of that's just what's going on here. But you can see after I scrubbed it for a little bit and soaked up a little bit more, this is like the residue is coming off. So that is rusty residue right there. Anyway, so I will keep poking at this, and yeah, we'll find out. So you can see after some additional scrubbing, this is starting to look much better. It will start looking dry because I am using rubbing alcohol, and rubbing alcohol will just strip oils away. And it's not like damaging the G10, it's just drying it out, this very, very top surface layer that is exposed from this milling process. So it's fine. You just put a little dab of mineral oil in there, and it'll look back like shiny, black, new like that. But yeah, I'm just kind of rubbing this off, trying to get it out, and yeah, okay. While I had this open, I figured I'd show you. This is the detent ball ramp, and that is why I was having trouble finding the place it went off, is because it is indeed, they did a great job. It is indeed the kind that is long in this dimension in a way that you don't feel this transition. That's a really nice transition out of a detent ball ramp. Like I said, it's not deep enough to begin with, but you know, beggars can't be choosers. This over here is scratch patterns that Stefan himself made while fixing this burr. Like I said, there was a burr right on the edge right there, and he used an abrasive, I think honestly a sharpening stone. I forget exactly what he had, but you know. So these scratches are just cosmetic, it doesn't really matter, and the point is he was able to knock that off. In general, I would use something like a needle file. Let me grab something real quick. Right, so I would use something like this and stick it in the hole. I'm going to use the back side so I just don't risk any damage at all, but I'm not going to actually push on it. But you basically stick it in the hole, and you're doing what is called reaming effectively. You're running it back and forth gently over the inside of this hole and just trying to remove whatever the aggressive little burr part is. This will allow you to get your grinding effort, your material removal effort all inside the hole instead of external to the hole. But you know, work with what you got. It's not the end of the world. You can see even with something like the corner of a sharpening plate, you can still do just fine. So I have bent this in. It might not look any different, but I measured it, and stacking this up, I bent this in just about 1/64th of an inch. So we're talking very, very tiny measurements here, and I'm going to see if it made enough of an impact. If it's not enough of an impact, you just go a little bit further. You're basically just bending it out. I'm not going to keep bending it past you because I want to see where this goes. And if you find that it's too far, if you made it too light, you just go the other direction. And basically, as long as you're not doing significant amounts of bending, these things will just kind of bend. If you're working with a really stiff bar or something like that, you might need to heat this up. You can use a little propane torch, or like, you know, like the torch style cigarette lighter. You can just use that to heat this up. The thing about heating steel is that you can discolor it. The same thing with titanium. If you heat one of these with a torch to bend it, you will likely discolor it if you get it hot enough for it to really matter. You can get rid of that coloration with something like Winxigan. You can get rid of that coloration with sanding, or you can just leave that coloration there and not care because it's inside your knife and you're never going to look at it. But you know, a lot of people are super pedantic, and you technically can see that through the gap. So anyway, with something like this is such a flexible bar. You can very easily just bend this by just pressing like this. You hold these parts in place, brace it, and press out. And again, I'm not going to overextend it this time because I want to see what this depth works like. Okay, we're all back together and ready to go. You can see my centering is a little bit off. I will fuss with that and get it back to center because it was center when I took it apart. This is a relatively easy knife to center in the fact that you can control where it's going relatively easily, but it's not an easy knife to center in the sense that it just goes back together centered. You have to work to center this knife, and it's a bit of a pain in the butt because every single one of these spots is dual keyed, and so it's it's hard to get tightness in the spots where you want it at the time you want it when everything is aligned the way you want it. Normally, if this is not free spinning or if you don't have to have a second tool in there, it's just a little bit easier to do. So I wouldn't say this is complicated to take apart or put back together in the sense that you don't understand what the goal is, like you just mechanically don't know what's going on, but it is complicated in the sense that there's just literally a lot of moving pieces. But let's feel this action. Yeah, that is, okay. So this is a relatively small change. But all I did was move it 1/64 of an inch, and now this is, it's still a very solid, I'd say medium firm detent, but it's just no longer a exceptionally hard detent. And this is still a very jabby flipper tab, but that is just, yeah, that is meaningfully better. So I don't know, you could go even further. This is still a firm detent for how jabby this is. If this was your own knife, you could also even try and knock down this top point here, because this just is unnecessarily pointy, but this is already so much more comfortable than it was when I was trying to do it before. You had to really build up force, and now you can just kind of push on it. So this is, I'm going to consider this a success. Stefan, if you want to keep going further, it's not hard to do. And like I said, I will fuss with this and get it back to perfectly centered before I ship this, wrap this up and ship it back to you. So thanks everyone for watching. Thanks Stefan for lending me this, and hopefully you don't have any more corrosion problems, but if you do, it's not terribly hard to address. Anyway, yeah, thanks everyone for joining me on this little adventure. I'll talk to you guys next time.